It is a tale, certainly, of the haves and have-nots, and it's fair to say what's going on in Baltimore is going on in cities all over the country, but in Baltimore also much, much more magnified. I want to bring Elan Wee into this discussion. She's a staff writer for the Washington Post. And let's talk about this. There are a lot of people who argue that this is the way the system was designed on purpose, with, people who are wealthy living in one place and sort of living in a community that's propped up by people who make less than minimum wage. Do you agree with this, that this system is actually designed this way and the only way to change it is by creating an entirely new system?
Well, certainly if we want to live in a capitalist society, we want to enjoy a free market, income inequality is a byproduct of that there are going to be people who make more than other folks. What I think is concerning to many people, including economists, is the level at which income inequality has grown in America. I mean, right now you're seeing something like the top 10% of households taking home 50% of the nation's wealth. And so the question becomes, what are the social implications of that in terms of does that breed unrest? Does that breed anxiety among other income levels? And then also, what are the economic implications of that? Does such a large amount of wealth being concentrated among the top tiers of American households, does that stimulate economic growth? Does it trickle down to other economic classes? So what we're really grappling with is not necessarily the fact of income inequality, but the magnitude of income inequality.
I think that's an important point. And since I have you here, I want to kind of pick your brain on something that you know a little more about than a lot of people, and that is food prices. I know that some interesting information, I think just out today, is that a new record was set, at least for as long as the UN Food and Agriculture Organization has been keeping tabs on this, and that is the food price index. Went to 236 points last month, and that was an increase of 2.2% from January. A record. Let's bring the price of food and kind of relate it to this income inequality discussion.
So one thing to consider when you talk about rising food prices and also rising commodity prices in general, not just food but energy costs, gasoline, et cetera, is that lower income households spend a large proportion of their income on food, on these basic necessities, and that leaves them less money to spend on discretionary items, which is one thing that actually helps drive the economy, and also reduces the amount of product that they can actually buy. In fact, in January in the U.S., what we found was that even though we received a payroll tax cut, all workers received a 2% benefit to their paychecks, that money was actually eaten up by inflation, by rising food costs, by rising gas prices. So that's something.
So the paycheck looks a little better,
but doesn't go quite as far. Exactly. And so that's something that is really important to think about when you look at ways to stimulate the economy, and particularly ways to help the most vulnerable consumers.
I've got to bring this up because it was just kind of shocking to me. A few days ago here on RT, we did a story about some delectable items in New York. I'm talking about a $175 burger. It's a burger with, Kobe beef and foie gras.
Hopefully some diamonds in there or something like that for that price.
Yeah, and this is on sale at a cafe on Wall Street, surprisingly. $10,000 martinis are popping up, $1,000 desserts. Do you think that we're going to continue to see more and more things like this, things that only the wealthiest people in the world can afford, as more and more people are using food stamps and going to the food pantries?
I think that one thing that's interesting about the income gap in America is that it's really driven by tremendous gains at the top of the spectrum. So it's not necessarily that the lower income people are making less money, but that the richest are getting phenomenally richer than the rest of us. To be in the top 0.5% of Americans, you have to make $2 million. But to be in just the top 1%, your income only needs to be $800,000. So you're really seeing growth at the very high end. And the question for Americans is this the environment, is this the country that we want to live in? And some new research recently came out that showed that Americans, when looking at income distribution charts, they actually favored income distribution that was closer to Sweden than closer to America. And they don't understand that there is such an enormous gap in this country. So that's one thing to think about.
We actually interviewed one of the people who kind of took part in those surveys and creating those charts. I thought it was so interesting, not only the disparity here, but how many Americans are unaware that it actually exists, or at least to the extent to which it does exist. A real quick, Elan, your predictions for how this changes, if it changes, when it changes.
I think it will be very difficult to change. There are a number of factors that contribute contribute to it, including tax policy. Some people have pointed to immigration. There are also some political questions in terms of the strength of unions. How much is that playing into the picture? So one thing I think that you will definitely see, though, is that there is a growing sense among some of the world's richest that this income inequality needs to be rectified. You see that evidenced by the Billionaires Pledge started by the Gates Foundation. So there is a growing recognition that there is a problem, and hopefully people will look at ways to solve it.
Certainly these are discussions going on a national stage right now. Ilan Mui, staff writer for The Washington Post.